The wind howled through the mountain passes, sharp against the skin and biting at the soul. A lone warrior knelt in the frost, eyes closed, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. Strength was in his body, yes, but his spirit wavered. His strikes were fast, precise, lethal, but only when no pressure threatened to pierce the veil of his fear. His mind, fractured by doubt and ego, betrayed him even as his body obeyed. In the remote dojo, the mentor appeared like a shadow, calm yet commanding. His presence alone seemed to quiet the room, drawing attention to the subtle rhythm of the warrior's heartbeat, the slight tremor in his hands, the tension in his shoulders. He watched silently as the young fighter moved through basic forms, noting the raw skill, but also the gaps. The hesitation, the impulsive strikes, the fleeting moments where fear took the reins. Strength, the mentor said, voice low, is not measured by speed or force. It is measured by mastery of the mind and spirit. Without that, even the sharpest blade is a danger only to its wielder. The warrior bristled. He had trained for years, fought countless sparring matches, yet here he was, confronted by a presence that saw what he could not. Ego whispered, "I am skilled. I am fast. I am enough." But the mentor's gaze cut through the lie. Fear, subtle and cunning, had been his silent companion, dictating choices, clouding judgment, and inflating confidence where none should exist. The first lessons were not physical. They were mental, emotional, and spiritual. Awareness of fear became the first task. To notice it as it surfaced in breath, posture, and thought, without fleeing or suppressing. The warrior was instructed to observe ego, recognizing its whispers for dominance, praise, or avoidance. Each moment of hesitation was a signal, each rush of pride a mirror to examine. The exercises were simple, yet brutally effective. Stillness under observation, meditation in silence, deliberate repetition of even the smallest movements. The warrior struggled. His mind raced, tugging toward old habits, resisting discomfort, seeking validation in speed and strength rather than in presence. Doubt gnawed at him. Could he survive this path? Was this quiet torment a test of patience or a reflection of his own weakness? The mentor's instructions were clear. Courage alone does not suffice. Skill alone is hollow. True strength demanded surrender to discipline, to presence, to relentless self-examination. By nightfall, the warrior began to sense the vastness of what lay ahead. Each breath taken with attention revealed the chaos of his mind. Each pause, each measured step, each deliberate strike highlighted the distance between raw ability and disciplined mastery. The lesson was harsh but illuminating. Without command over the self, the warrior was nothing more than a vessel for chance and weakness. The mountains whispered around him, wind carrying the distant echo of streams and the rustle of bamboo. The dojo's silence pressed in, and the mentor's words lingered. A sword without control can cut its master. So too does a mind unmastered betray its own body. In the cold glow of the lantern, the warrior clenched his fists, aware for the first time that this path was not for glory, not for recognition, but for the forging of an inner power so profound it would make him dangerous even to himself. Transition. Tomorrow the warrior will enter the silence of power, confronting the turbulence within, where mastery begins not with movement, but with stillness. The night deepened, and with it, the warrior's understanding. He remained kneeling, cold seeping into his bones, yet the fire of awareness began to burn quietly within. The mentor's presence was steady, unwavering, like a mountain watching the tides of the world shift below. No words were needed. The lessons came in subtle observations. The way the warrior's eyes darted when uncertainty arose, the tremor in his hands when pride pushed too hard, the shallow rhythm of his breath when fear crept close. "Your body is ready," the mentor said softly, "but your mind is a battlefield. Strength without clarity is a weapon turned inward. If you cannot master yourself, the world will master you." The warrior felt the weight of this truth settle on him. He had spent years honing techniques, perfecting strikes, building endurance, but all of it had been scattered across a mind untrained to stillness, a spirit untested by silence. Each movement had been reactive, each decision impulsive, each victory fleeting. He realized that every defeat he had faced in hidden moments, hesitation, misjudgment, regret, had stemmed not from lack of skill, but from the chaos he carried within. The mentor guided him through the first deliberate exercises: breath control, awareness of subtle muscular tension, observation of thought without attachment. The warrior learned to notice the patterns of fear, how it arose at the prospect of failure, how it whispered excuses when discipline called, how it masked itself as confidence to lure him into error. Ego, he saw, was no less cunning, inflating success, denying weakness, convincing him that talent alone could suffice. Hours passed, yet the warrior did not move from his posture of kneeling observation. Fatigue gnawed at his body, but the deeper strain was mental. He was forced to sit with himself, with every imperfection laid bare, every distraction magnified, every fear acknowledged. Slowly, an awareness began to emerge, a fragile, shimmering line of clarity threading through the storm of his thoughts. "Every warrior believes in strength," the mentor said, voice cutting through the night. "But the most dangerous strength is invisible. It is forged quietly in the crucible of the mind, tempered by discipline and made unshakable by presence. This is the beginning of your path." The warrior bowed, not in submission, to the mentor, but in recognition of the truth he had glimpsed. Raw talent, speed, and reflexes were meaningless without the inner framework to guide them. In that quiet acknowledgement, he tasted the first stirrings of disciplined fearlessness, the dangerous calm that comes from mastering oneself. As the first hint of dawn touched the mountaintop, the warrior stood, muscles stiff, yet spirit alert. He knew the path ahead would demand more than physical skill. It would demand relentless attention, patience, and surrender to the process of self-mastery. This was the crucible in which the Bushido Mind would be forged, a force quiet yet lethal, present yet unseen, disciplined yet unyielding. Transition. With this understanding, the warrior is ready to enter the silence of power, where stillness becomes the weapon that tempers chaos into strength. The warrior awoke before dawn, the chill of the mountain air pressing against his skin. The world was quiet, yet inside him the usual torrent of thoughts raged, questions of ability, doubt, regret. The mentor stood silently, observing, as if the very act of watching could extract chaos from the mind. "You will learn," the mentor said, "that power is not in motion, but in stillness. The mind that cannot pause cannot strike with precision." The first trial was deceptively simple. Hours of kneeling in meditation, awareness fixed on the breath, the rising and falling of the chest, the subtle shift of muscles with each inhale and exhale. The warrior struggled. His mind rebelled, darting from thought to thought, clinging to memories, anxieties, fantasies of past victories. Frustration built, the body ached, yet he was forbidden to move. Every impulse to act, to escape, to distract himself, was met with a silent gaze that demanded endurance. Breath became the bridge between chaos and control. With each measured inhale, awareness sharpened. With each deliberate exhale, tension eased. He learned to notice fear as it arose, not suppressing it, not reacting, but observing it as one observes a leaf caught in a stream, present, real, yet transient. Ego, too, revealed itself. In every thought of comparison, every craving for recognition, every impatience with repetition. The warrior began to see that these mental fluctuations were the true battlefield. The mentor introduced movement, slow and deliberate. Each step, each shift of weight, each gesture was performed in silence, fully conscious, fully present. The warrior discovered that even the smallest action could become an arena of mastery. Precision demanded stillness. Presence demanded surrender. Power emerged not in speed, but in awareness. With every repetition, the mind grew quieter, the body steadier, and the spirit more attuned to subtle shifts in intention and energy. Pain and fatigue were constant companions. Muscles burned, joints protested, and the mind sought escape. But the warrior learned to treat these sensations as teachers, not adversaries. Each ache highlighted weakness, each impulse to flee revealed attachment, each mental distraction pointed to untrained habits. Through this deliberate confrontation, the warrior's inner turbulence began to settle. The river of thought slowed, clarity arose like sunlight piercing morning mist. The mentor spoke rarely, but when he did, his words cut sharply, like the edge of a blade. Silence is not void. It is a sword, sharp, decisive, and precise. The warrior who cannot master his own inner storm is powerless in the world. By the end of the day, the warrior could feel it. A subtle shift, a whisper of stillness that carried weight, a quiet confidence growing where restlessness had ruled. The chaos of his mind was not gone, but it no longer commanded him. Instead, it became raw material, a force that, when disciplined, could sharpen thought, focus, and action. Transition. As the warrior embraces stillness, he will soon confront fear directly, learning that courage is not the absence of terror, but the mastery of it. Night fell like a heavy curtain, and the warrior remained seated, breath steady, muscles tense, yet relaxed. The silence was profound, stretching beyond the room, beyond the monastery walls, into the recesses of his own mind. Thoughts surged, uninvited and persistent, yet he no longer chased them. Each moment of awareness became a training ground. The recognition of doubt, the observation of fear, the noting of desire. He realized that true power did not arise from action alone, but from the ability to observe without being pulled into reaction. The mentor moved beside him like a shadow, never intrusive, yet always present. Presence, he said softly, is the weapon you carry when all else fails. Silence is not absence, but control. In it, the mind sharpens, the body steadies, and the spirit aligns. Those who fear stillness fear themselves. The following days brought the rigor of repetition. Early mornings in meditation, afternoons in deliberate movement, evenings in quiet reflection. Each exercise, though simple in appearance, carried layers of subtlety. A single misalignment of posture, a shallow breath, a wandering thought, each became a signal, a teacher, a compass pointing toward mastery. The warrior's patience was tested. The mind sought distraction, craving relief from discomfort. Yet gradually, subtle victories emerged. He noticed the gap between impulse and action widening, hesitation replaced by deliberate choice, and fear transforming from a commanding force to a silent guide. In one pivotal moment, the warrior found himself standing by a mountain stream, observing the water's flow. The mentor instructed him to mirror it, to move with the current rather than against it, to remain fluid yet focused, powerful yet restrained. Every motion became an exercise in attention. The alignment of body, the precision of movement, the unbroken awareness of breath and thought. Chaos was no longer a threat. It became energy to channel, a partner rather than an adversary. By the end of the week, the warrior experienced a quiet transformation. His breath was measured, his stance unwavering, his mind alert yet calm. Fear, regret, and doubt still arose, but they were met with observation, not reaction. Presence had become a tangible force, silent, disciplined, and commanding. The Bushido principle of inner strength had taken root. Mastery over self preceded mastery over the world. The mentor nodded, satisfaction subtle but unmistakable. You have learned the first law of the silent warrior. Control begins within. The mind that is mastered commands life itself. Transition. With stillness now shaping his actions, the warrior is prepared to face fear directly, learning that it is not an enemy, but an ally guiding him toward deeper mastery. The dawn arrived muted, a pale light filtering through the misty mountains. The warrior stood at the edge of a steep cliff, the wind biting at his skin, his heart hammering in rhythm with the unseen currents of the valley below. Fear was present, sharp and insistent, whispering caution, urging retreat. Yet he no longer fled from it. He had learned from silence that fear, like water, could either erode or shape the stone. The mentor's voice was calm, resonant with authority. Fear is not your enemy. It is the compass that points to weakness, the signal of where discipline is required. You will not escape it, but you can learn to move through it. The first trial was simple in its design, yet profound in its impact. Stand, breathe, and allow fear to exist fully. The warrior's legs trembled, his palms slick with sweat, as the vertigo of the height pressed on his mind. Each thought of retreat was noted, each surge of panic observed without yielding. Slowly, he realized that fear was not a tyrant commanding his actions, but a teacher revealing the gaps in his focus, his attention, and his courage. Next came controlled combat with a superior opponent. The mentor's strikes were precise, rapid, unrelenting. The warrior's reflexes, honed through prior silence, moved him instinctively, yet the fear of failure pulsed through every muscle. Each clash of wooden swords was a dialogue between presence and panic, awareness and impulse. Pain, both physical and mental, became a signal, a lesson. Hesitation cost energy, indecision invited vulnerability. In this crucible, fear illuminated the warrior's edges, showing where discipline had yet to be applied. The principle of flow was introduced next. The warrior walked along narrow paths over the river, each step requiring full attention, balance, and focus. Fear whispered of misstep, of falling, of mortality. But the mentor instructed, do not fight it. Let it move through you. It is the current that can carry you safely if you do not resist. In each step, the warrior learned to align thought with action, to merge intention with movement, to transform fear into calibrated energy. Through each trial, a pattern emerged. Fear was constant, unavoidable, yet it no longer dictated his choices. Instead, it became a measure of his discipline, a gauge of presence, a catalyst for awareness. Pain and doubt ceased to be obstacles. They became teachers, guiding him toward refined action and clarity of mind. By the day's end, the warrior felt a subtle but undeniable shift. His breath was steady, his gaze unwavering, and the inner tremors that once dictated movement had quieted. He began to understand the paradox of the Bushido mind. The most dangerous strength arises not from suppressing fear, but from embracing it with intention, aligning it with disciplined action. Transition. As fear becomes a guide rather than a master, the warrior will now face relentless repetition, where discipline forged in practice will transform skill into unshakable inner strength. Night deepened around the training ground. The warrior, muscles fatigued but mind alert, faced his final exercise of the day, a prolonged combat simulation under dim lantern light, where missteps could cost him balance, focus, or composure. The mentor watched silently, shadows flickering across his stoic features. Every strike, parry, and movement was a test, not of speed or strength, but of the warrior's ability to remain present while fear surged through him. The first clash of blades brought a jolt of panic, a reflexive urge to defend or retreat. He recalled the lessons of silence, to observe, not react. Breath slowed, eyes sharpened, awareness expanded. The strike that had once induced fear now became data, an opportunity to refine movement, to anticipate, to act with calculated calm. Each fearful thought was acknowledged, dissected, and then released, leaving clarity in its wake. In a moment of perfect alignment, the warrior flowed with his opponent, each action a conversation, each pause a meditation. Fear was present, palpable, yet no longer commanding. It guided, informed, and strengthened, a hidden ally that sharpened precision, sharpened awareness, sharpened courage. Pain, once an adversary, became a teacher. Bruises, sore muscles, exhaustion, each a mirror reflecting where discipline had faltered, where presence had waned, where the mind had hesitated. The warrior learned to embrace this feedback without judgment, transforming discomfort into insight. In this crucible, he discovered that inner chaos and fear, when met with unwavering attention, could be harnessed into an almost tangible force of calm power. By the end of the night, the warrior stood alone on the riverbank, the moonlight glinting off the water. His body was drained, yet his mind was sharp. His heart raced, yet his spirit was steady. Fear had not vanished, but it had been transformed, from a tyrant into a guide, from a source of hesitation into a source of focus. He had glimpsed the paradox of true strength. It is most formidable, not when untested, but when it has been tempered by challenge, by confrontation, by presence. The mentor approached, silent yet approving. "You see now," he said softly, "that fear is the crucible. Master it, and the mind becomes a weapon sharper than any blade. Let it guide, not rule. Let it illuminate, not blind." Transition. With fear now integrated as a teacher rather than a foe, the warrior steps into the next stage. Relentless repetition, where discipline forged in routine and practice solidifies the inner strength that fear has revealed. The first rays of dawn brushed the mountains with gold, yet the warrior's eyes were heavy with fatigue from the previous day's trials. He knelt on the cold, dew-damp ground, bamboo leaves whispering in the morning breeze, and took a deliberate breath. Today would be the first of many days where repetition became both teacher and forge. The mentor's instructions were clear. Mastery is built not in single grand gestures, but in the invisible accumulation of countless disciplined actions performed with unwavering presence. The morning began with martial drills, each strike repeated hundreds of times. The movement was simple, almost boring, yet perfection demanded attention. The warrior's muscles ached, his mind threatened to wander, and frustration whispered that the effort was futile. But the mentor's voice cut through the haze. 1,000 repetitions teach what a single victory cannot. Every strike is a lesson in presence, every motion a step toward the mind's discipline. As sweat ran down his face, the warrior discovered that the monotony was deceptive. Each repetition revealed subtleties previously unnoticed, the micro-adjustments in balance, the alignment of breath and movement, the rhythm of intention that unified body and mind. He began to understand that the form itself was not the goal. The goal was the cultivation of unbroken attention, the transformation of mechanical motion into instinctive mastery. Next came meditation, interwoven with movement. Slow, deliberate, almost imperceptible shifts of posture demanded complete awareness. The warrior's mind, once restless, now tracked minute details. The weight of each limb, the flow of breath, the pulse of the ground beneath him. This repetition of focus taught patience, resilience, and the subtle power of presence. Chaos in the mind ebbed as attention sharpened, revealing the spaces where hesitation, doubt, or ego had previously lurked. Endurance exercises followed, each designed to challenge both body and resolve. Miles of uphill running, calisthenics, and long hours standing in position forced the warrior to confront the natural inclination to quit, to seek comfort, to indulge the ego's resistance. The mind rebelled, yet the body persisted, and through this alignment, the warrior felt the emergence of something previously elusive, the quiet power of disciplined strength. By midday, a rhythm emerged. Each action, whether striking, moving, or breathing, was executed with measured attention. The warrior realized that discipline was no longer an external imposition. It was internalized, a steady undercurrent guiding every motion. The mentor watched silently, knowing that true mastery is rarely visible, yet always undeniable in its effect. Even as fatigue weighed on his muscles and impatience gnawed at his mind, the warrior recognized that the invisible work, the unseen repetitions, the unremarkable yet precise acts, were forging a strength that would reveal itself only when truly tested. This was the paradox of the Bushido system. The strongest power is often invisible, quiet, and cultivated far from the eyes of the world. By the close of the day, the warrior's movements were sharper, his mind steadier, his breath deeper. Repetition had begun to tame chaos, discipline had begun to temper the spirit, and the seeds of unshakable inner strength were planted. Transition. As the warrior continues this rigorous practice, the next stage will confront the ego itself, revealing how pride, attachment, and illusion can undo even the most disciplined mind. The afternoon sun hung low, casting long shadows across the training ground. The warrior, drenched in sweat and covered in the dust of relentless drills, rose to begin the next cycle of practice. Repetition was no longer a chore. It was a crucible. Each block, each strike, each controlled step demanded total attention. The body had learned the motions, but the mind still wavered. Now he was learning to synchronize them, breath, thought, and movement converging into one precise action. The mentor introduced subtle variations in the drills, tiny shifts that forced the warrior to adapt without hesitation. Where once he had relied on brute strength or instinct, he now relied on presence, awareness, and instinct refined by countless repetitions. Each adjustment, each micro-correction, reinforced the connection between discipline and adaptability. The warrior began to understand that mastery is not rigid, it is flexible, responsive, and alive. Evenings were devoted to stillness, silent meditation after hours of physical exertion. Here, in quiet reflection, the lessons of the day crystallized. Fatigue, monotony, and frustration were no longer obstacles. They were the raw material of growth. The mind, once cluttered and reactive, now began to perceive patterns, anticipate challenges, and regulate impulses. Discipline had become more than habit. It was the very framework of thought. Pain and discomfort continued to test him. Bruised knuckles, burning legs, and throbbing shoulders were constant reminders of his humanity. Yet he no longer resisted them. He observed them, accepted them, and allowed them to refine rather than diminish his spirit. The Bushido principle was clear. True strength emerges not in ease or comfort, but in persistence under pressure, in action repeated with attention over and over, until the mind and body align. By the end of the day, as the sun dipped below the mountains and the dojo doors closed in silence, the warrior stood taller, not in stature, but in presence. His mind had learned endurance, his spirit had learned focus, and his body had learned precision. The invisible strength cultivated through repetition had begun to manifest as a calm, formidable power that was at once silent and undeniable. Transition. With discipline now deeply embedded through repetition, the warrior must face the final internal adversary, the ego, whose subtle deceptions can undermine even the most rigorous practice. Dawn crept through the bamboo grove, painting the dojo floor in slanted ribbons of gold. The warrior, now tempered by repetition and relentless discipline, felt a quiet confidence, yet a subtle tension lingered, an invisible weight he could not yet name. The mentor observed him with calm, unflinching eyes. "There is one adversary even repetition cannot conquer," he said. "The ego. The mind that deceives itself into thinking it is complete, powerful, or free." The day began with sparring exercises, each opponent a mirror reflecting the warrior's own pride and desire for recognition. With every parry and strike, he noticed flashes of impatience, subtle attempts to assert superiority, and brief surges of self-importance. The warrior realized that ego was not an enemy outside himself. It was a distortion inside, influencing every thought, every breath, every motion. The mentor guided him through reflection and deliberate confrontation. The warrior sat before a mirror, watching himself move, breathing, focusing, noting every micro-expression of arrogance, every flicker of judgment. Ego, he realized, thrived on comparison, on attachment, on the desire for acknowledgement. Even small victories, once satisfying, now felt hollow if they fed pride rather than presence. Mental exercises followed, designed to strip away attachment to outcome. Tasks were intentionally simple, yet impossible to perform perfectly on the first attempt. Cutting with precision, repeating complex forms, counting breaths without losing awareness. Each failure was magnified, forcing the warrior to confront frustration, impatience, and the ego's instinctive defense mechanisms. Pride rose, subtle and persistent, whispering that he was better, stronger, more capable than the exercise demanded. But the mentor's presence reminded him, mastery is restraint, not assertion. Clarity, not dominance. Through repeated observation, reflection, and measured action, the warrior began to integrate the lessons of silence, fear, and disciplined repetition with the recognition of ego's subtle power. He learned that true presence requires humility, and that strength is most dangerous when wielded without attachment or vanity. Each conscious act of restraint dissolved a fragment of ego's influence, forging a quiet, controlled authority that emanated from within rather than seeking validation outside. The afternoon passed in rigorous introspection and movement, with the warrior alternately practicing and meditating, confronting every moment of self-importance as it arose. He felt the familiar surge of frustration when his expectations were unmet, yet, through observation and breath, he allowed it to pass. Slowly, ego lost its grip, not forcibly, but by the warrior's conscious decision to act from awareness rather than pride. By the day's end, his presence had deepened. Movements flowed with quiet authority. Reactions were tempered by reflection. Decisions arose from clarity rather than impulse. The mentor nodded, silently approving, knowing that this confrontation was one of the final thresholds before complete integration of the Bushido mind. Transition. Having faced ego and tempered its influence, the warrior is now prepared to embody the full, dangerous strength of the Bushido mind, where discipline, presence, and clarity converge into unstoppable power. Night settled over the dojo, quiet except for the soft scrape of wooden sandals on polished floors. The warrior continued his exercises alone, guided now by the lessons internalized through confrontation with ego. Every movement was deliberate, every breath observed. What had once been automatic, instinctive reaction now carried the weight of conscious awareness. Ego no longer whispered commands. It was acknowledged, noted, and set aside. Sparring with partners became a practice in humility. He resisted the urge to dominate or to prove himself, instead responding with measured precision. When opponents tested him, his mind remained calm. When mistakes occurred, he observed without judgment. The mentor had impressed upon him that true strength is invisible until called upon. And in this quiet, the warrior began to feel the raw power of undistracted presence. Each strike, each parry became an extension of mind and spirit, disciplined and unshakable. Reflection deepened as he considered the broader implications. Ego had once dictated choices, distracted attention, and inflated fear. By recognizing its subtle influence, the warrior saw that mastery was not simply the control of body or skill. It was the governance of thought and intention. Strength now flowed from alignment of action with purpose, not from assertion or pride. The warrior moved through the final evening drills with a sense of profound integration. Silence, repetition, confrontation with fear, and now the humility gained from facing ego merged into a cohesive presence. Each breath carried clarity, each movement intention. He felt a steady, unshakable energy, quiet, disciplined, and fully his own. The invisible threads of mind, body, and spirit had been woven into a single, formidable force. By the chapter's close, the warrior understood the paradox of the Bushido mind. The most dangerous strength arises not from brute power, but from the discipline that tempers ego, the awareness that guides fear, and the relentless refinement of presence. Ego had ceased to be master. It had become a tool, a guide, a measure of integrity rather than a source of distraction. The warrior's inner authority was complete, ready to face the ultimate test of mastery. Transition. With ego mastered, the warrior steps into the final crucible, prepared to embody the most dangerous inner strength recorded: discipline, presence, and fearlessness fully realized. The first light of dawn brushed the mountaintops with a pale, burning gold. The warrior stood alone, the cool wind tugging at his robes, his breath steady, each inhale and exhale measured like the turning of gears in a perfectly crafted mechanism. The journey had been long: silent meditation, grueling repetition, fear faced and tamed, ego confronted and subdued. Now, the culmination awaited, a trial not of skill alone, but of complete integration of mind, body, and spirit. The mentor appeared, as silent and imposing as the mountains themselves. Today, you will see if the strength you carry within can manifest in the world without faltering, he said. Not for glory, not for recognition, but for the command of yourself. The trial was deceptively simple. A duel against multiple opponents, each testing a different facet of mastery. One would test patience, another speed, one presence, another clarity under chaos. The warrior approached with calm, every muscle tuned, every thought deliberate. His previous victories no longer mattered. Each strike, each step, each breath arose not from desire, but from presence, perfected through relentless practice. As the duel began, chaos erupted. Opponents moved with speed and unpredictability, yet the warrior flowed through the moment as though he were not in the midst of attack, but observing a pattern unfold in slow motion. Fear whispered faintly at the edges of perception. Ego tugged subtly towards self-assertion, yet both were acknowledged, neither allowed to dictate action. The mind was quiet, the spirit aligned, the body responsive beyond conscious thought. Each strike he delivered was precise, every movement efficient, every defense exact. Observers might have seen minimal effort. The truth lay beneath the surface, a storm of awareness, preparation, and inner strength. The power that once relied on aggression and reaction had been replaced by a dangerous calm, a stillness that could become lethal in the blink of an eye. In the quiet moments between exchanges, he noticed subtle cues in opponents, shifts in weight, hesitation, tension. Where fear or ego appeared in their movements, he responded with unflinching clarity. Each moment became a lesson, each challenge a measure of his inner command. The Bushido Mind, the fusion of discipline, presence, and courage, was alive and tangible, a force that required no declaration to be feared. By the end of the first phase, the warrior felt the culmination of years of deliberate effort, facing not external enemies, but the inner chaos that had once controlled him. He moved with confidence, not born of arrogance, but of the unshakable integration of skill, awareness, and presence. Transition. The trial intensifies as the warrior now faces the final test, where inner mastery must manifest flawlessly in every action, embodying the most dangerous strength ever recorded. The final challenge pressed the warrior to the edge of endurance. The opponents increased in speed and intensity, their strikes precise, designed to provoke fear, impatience, or rash reaction. Yet, the warrior's mind remained anchored. Every movement was intentional, flowing seamlessly from observation to action, presence translating into unshakable execution. Where others might have flinched or hesitated, he responded with a calm that was almost unnatural, a dangerous stillness that betrayed no inner struggle. Fear, once a tyrant in his thoughts, had become an advisor. He could sense its presence, note its shape, and use it to guide timing, strategy, and energy. Ego no longer interfered. It had been reduced to a servant, silently measuring efficiency, never dictating action. Chaos was no longer an obstacle, but a medium, energy channeled into precise responses. Each strike he delivered was economical, yet devastating in effect. Each defense effortless, yet unbreakable. Observers saw perfection. He felt presence, the seamless integration of all he had learned. The duel culminated in silence. The opponents yielded, not through defeat alone, but in recognition of a mastery that transcended physicality. The warrior's inner calm radiated outward, commanding respect without declaration. Every lesson, the confrontation with fear, the relentless discipline, the humility before ego, and the cultivation of presence, had merged into a singular, potent force. This was strength that could not be measured by muscle or speed, but by the alignment of mind, body, and spirit into an unstoppable, disciplined whole. The mentor stepped forward, eyes steady, voice quiet but heavy with approval. You have walked the path few can endure. You are no longer merely skilled. You are present, disciplined, and formidable in ways that cannot be challenged by others or by the chaos within. This is the most dangerous strength, mastery over self. Alone, the warrior stepped into the dawn. The wind whispered through the mountains, carrying a sense of calm authority. Strength, once thought to reside in outward display, now lived entirely within him, silent, precise, and absolute. The chaos of mind, the pull of ego, the tremor of fear, all had been transmuted into an inner power that was unstoppable and serene. In that moment, he embodied the essence of Bushido, a mind and spirit so disciplined, so present, that weakness had no place, and every action arose from the deepest reservoir of unshakable inner strength. Core moral reinforced. True, formidable power is not wielded outwardly. It is the disciplined, fearless mastery of one's own mind and spirit, a dangerous strength that commands from within.